My name is Dorothy Patterson, and at 68 years old, I truly believed I had already lived through all the surprises life could possibly throw at me. Harold, my partner for 50 years of marriage, had passed away a little over 3 years ago, at the age of 78. He left behind not only a house full of memories, but also, something I was about to discover on my birthday, a deep secret that would completely change the way I looked at our life together. It was a clear September morning in Bakersfield, California. The kind of golden morning that reminded me of the very first autumn Harold and I spent in our home on Oleander Avenue, where we had grown side by side as husband and wife. The mail arrived early, and between the usual bills and some late birthday cards, there was one yellowed envelope addressed to me in a handwriting I didn't recognize. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Harold and I had shared. Decades of breakfasts, conversations, and silences, and I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, there was a letter dated 2 weeks earlier, signed by a woman named Sarah Mitchell. "Dear Mrs. Patterson," the letter began, "I'm sorry to reach out to you like this, but I believe we share something important. My father's name was Harold James Patterson, and I am his daughter." The words seemed to blur before my eyes. I read and reread that sentence, as if repeating it would somehow change what it meant. Harold had never once mentioned having children before marrying me. Not once. In all those years together, in all our talks about family, in all the sorrow we felt for not being able to have children of our own, he never let slip a single word about this. I kept reading, my heart pounding harder with every line. My mother, Hye-jin Kim, met Harold in 1952 when he was serving in the Korean War. They had a relationship, and I was born in March of 1954. He returned to the United States before my birth, and as far as I know, he never learned that I existed. My coffee had gone cold in my hands as I tried to absorb every word. I knew Harold had served in the Korean War, but he hardly ever talked about that time, only said it had been a hard chapter, filled with things he preferred to forget. Now, for the first time, I understood why. The letter went on. I found some of my mother's old letters after she passed away last year. In them, she wrote that she had tried to contact him several times during the 1950s, but never got a reply. "I recently discovered that he married you in 1958. I am not looking for money or trying to cause trouble. I only wish to know more about my father, and if possible, to meet you." My hands started to shake. I let the letter fall onto the table and stood up abruptly. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed to echo through the silence of the kitchen. Harold had a daughter who was now 54 years old, a daughter who had grown up never knowing her father, while I had spent half a century by his side. I walked to the living room window and stared at the garden Harold had cared for so tenderly. The rose bushes he had planted were still blooming, in full beauty, even without him there to tend to them. How could so much beauty grow from what now felt like a lie? Memories rushed over me like a flood. I remembered how Harold sometimes got lost in thought whenever we passed by a playground. His eyes lingered on the children playing, as if some unspoken ache was hidden inside him. I also recalled the times I suggested we adopt a child. He always changed the subject, saying we were fine, just the two of us. In the days that followed, I bounced between disbelief and a quiet, burning anger. How could he? How could anyone hide something so big? We were supposed to be partners in everything, or at least that's what I had always believed. We shared our joys, our sorrows, our fears, our dreams. And yet, all those decades together, Harold never once spoke about his daughter. The anxiety wouldn't let me rest. After a few days, I decided to search our bedroom for answers Harold had never given me while alive. At the very back of the closet, behind boxes of papers I had never touched, I found a small, dusty shoebox. Inside, there were old photographs, letters written in Korean that I couldn't understand, and a birth certificate. "Sarah Kim," I whispered. Born on March 15th, 1954, in Seoul, South Korea. Father, Harold James Patterson. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the paper. There it was in black and white, undeniable proof of a secret hidden for more than half a century, and there was more. The box was full of letters, all of them addressed to Harold at different military bases. Not one had ever reached him. Every single one was stamped with unknown recipient or undeliverable. I sat on the bedroom floor and opened one at random. The English was hesitant but filled with emotion. The handwriting was delicate, feminine. My dear Harold, I hope this letter finds you well. Our daughter has been born. She is beautiful and has your eyes. Please come back to us. I need you here. With love, Hee-jin. Tears slid down my face. My chest felt like it was splitting open. Harold had never received these letters. They had all been returned, most likely lost in the chaos of the military mail system during the war, or due to constant transfers. He never knew Sarah existed, and yet, one question burned inside me. Why hadn't he ever told me about Hye-jin? Why had he never mentioned that he had loved someone in Korea before me? And more painful still, why had he chosen to keep that part of his past buried right up until his death? Weeks passed in a blur of confused emotions. I could hardly eat, sleep, or focus on anything. Until one afternoon, Margaret, my longtime neighbor and friend, knocked on my door. She carried a steaming casserole in her hands and worry in her eyes. Dorothy, Patterson, you're going to tell me what's going on, and you're going to tell me now, she said firmly, nudging her way inside. You've been walking around with that empty look like a ghost. Dorothy Patterson, you're going to tell me what's going on, and you're going to tell me right now, Margaret insisted, as she planted herself firmly in my living room. You've been looking like a ghost for weeks. So I told her everything. About the letter, about the shoebox, about the daughter Harold never knew and never told me about. Margaret listened quietly, her warm hand resting over mine while I cried. Oh, honey. She sighed when I finished. What a heartbreaking situation for everyone involved. How could he hide something like this from me, Margaret? 50 years of marriage, and not one word. Margaret went silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window overlooking Harold's garden. Do you remember how he was when you first met him? Do you remember the nightmares? I remembered well. Harold had come back from Korea a different man from the young soldier who had left. He was quiet, sometimes distant, haunted by memories he said were too painful to share. It had taken years for him to sleep through an entire night without waking drenched in sweat. Maybe, Margaret said softly. He thought that by not speaking of it, he was protecting all of you. You, himself. Maybe even that woman in Korea. Men of his generation often believed they could just bury the past and move forward as though it never happened. Her words planted a fragile seed of understanding in my wounded heart. Harold wasn't a cruel or dishonest man. He had been kind and thoughtful, the sort of man who fixed neighborhood kids' bicycles and never missed a birthday. Perhaps he really didn't know how to tell me about Hye-jin, especially once he realized she had tried to reach him and failed. But then there was Sarah, a grown woman who had lived her whole life without a father, who now wanted to reach across time and grief to meet me, the widow of a man she never knew. What was I supposed to do with that? It took me 2 full weeks before I could gather the courage to reply to Sarah's letter. I sat down several times, trying to put words on paper, only to crumple the sheets and start again. What do you say to a person like that? How do you explain 50 years of silence and ignorance? At last I wrote, Dear Sarah, your letter was truly a shock, but I believe you have the right to know about your father. Harold was a good man, though clearly a man who carried his own secrets and sorrows. I would very much like to meet you, if you are still interested. Maybe we can help each other understand who he really was. Her response came in less than a week. Sarah lived in San Francisco, was married, mother of 2 grown children, and she worked as an art teacher at a public school. She suggested we meet halfway in Fresno at a little cafe near the old train station. The day of the meeting, I arrived an hour early, nervous as a teenager on her first date. I ordered tea and sat by the window, watching every woman who walked through the door. How could I possibly recognize someone I had never seen, someone who carried in her veins the man I thought I had known so completely? At exactly 2 o'clock, she appeared. A woman with dark hair streaked with silver, scanning the cafe with hesitant eyes. She wasn't young, but there was something about the way she carried herself, steady, gentle, that reminded me instantly of Harold. The moment our eyes met, I knew it was her. "Dorothy?" she asked softly as she approached my table. "Sarah." I rose, unsure whether to shake her hand or embrace her. She solved the dilemma by pulling me into a warm, hesitant hug. We sat, across from each other, 2 strangers linked by the ghost of the same man, whom each of us had loved in different ways. Sarah had brought along a folder filled with documents and photographs. "I brought some things you might want to see," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Photos of my mother, some letters she kept, and my birth certificate." I turned. The photographs carefully, almost afraid they would crumble in my hands. Hyejin Kim was a strikingly beautiful woman, with gentle eyes and a shy smile. One picture showed her holding a baby, Sarah, I assumed, standing in front of a modest apartment building. Another captured her sitting on a park bench with a little girl, both of them smiling toward the camera. "She never married again," Sarah explained quietly. "She always said Harold had been the love of her life, even though he left. She died still believing he had chosen not to answer her letters." My chest tightened painfully. "He never got those letters, Sarah. I found them in his things. All of them were returned by the military postal service." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Then he truly didn't know?" "No," I said firmly. "He didn't know. But that still doesn't explain why he never told me about your mother, about what they had in Korea." I paused, swallowing back a lump in my throat. I'm still trying to make sense of that. It hurts to think he kept so much from me. Sarah nodded, her own expression softened with understanding. "I imagined it would be hard for you. Honestly, I hesitated. For months before sending that letter, I didn't want to ruin your memories of him." "You didn't ruin anything," I answered, surprised by the truth in my own words. "Actually, I think you might be helping me understand him better than I ever did." We spent the next 3 hours talking. Sarah told me about her childhood in Korea, about moving to the United States with her mother when she was 10, about trying to fit into a country where she barely spoke the language. I told her about Harold, the way he was so patient with the neighborhood kids, how he cared for his garden, how he sometimes woke in the middle of the night, trembling from nightmares he could never fully describe. He suffered a lot because of the war, I told her. I think maybe the guilt he carried about your mother was part of that pain. He might have felt he'd abandoned you, whether or not that was really true. Sarah showed me a photo of her 2 children, Michael and Lisa. "They have kids of their own," she said with a sad smile. "And they'll never get to meet their great-grandfather." "But they can know him through us," I replied, the words surprising me with how quickly they came. "If you'd like, I would love to meet your family. Maybe we can build some new bonds, even if the old ones were lost." Her face brightened in a way that made me think of spring sunlight after a long winter. "You'd truly want that?" Sarah, when Harold died, it felt like the last thread of family had been cut from my life. Finding out I have a stepdaughter and grandchildren in heart, well, maybe this is the most unexpected birthday gift I've ever received. In the months that followed, Sarah and I formed a genuine friendship. She visited me in Bakersfield, and together we went through Harold's belongings in a way that honored both his memory and the truth of his past. We made a photo album that included our shared memories alongside the pictures of Hyejin and Sarah's early years. That Thanksgiving, the house that had been quiet for 3 long years filled up with voices and laughter again. Sarah brought Michael and Lisa with their families, her grandkids, Tommy, 8, and Grace, 5, ran through Harold's garden with the kind of joy that made the roses look brighter just by being near them. "Grandma Dorothy," Tommy asked, slipping his small hand into mine, "did Grandpa Harold really plant all these flowers?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said, guiding him between the rose bushes. "He planted them with a lot of love. Mom says he was our great-grandpa, even though we didn't get to meet him." "That's right," I answered softly, "and I think he'd be very happy to know you're here now." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah and I sat on the porch, watching the bright Bakersfield stars prick the sky like tiny lanterns. The air smelled faintly of citrus and dust, and somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and then fell silent. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" For giving me a family, for not resenting me for showing up like this, for making it possible for my kids to know something about their grandfather. I took her hand and felt the strange, familiar shape of her fingers, so much like Harold's. "Sarah, you didn't take anything from me. You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost, a sense of family." "He loved you very much, you know," she said after a moment. "My mother always said you could tell from the few letters that did make it through, before the end of the war. He wrote about a girl in California who was waiting for him, about how special she was." Tears burned my eyes. He loved me, and I loved him. But I'm learning that love doesn't mean knowing every secret someone carries. Sometimes it means accepting the pain they didn't know how to share. The following spring, Sarah helped me turn part of Harold's garden into a small memorial. We planted a new section with traditional Korean flowers, azaleas and forsythia, beside the American roses he had tended so carefully. We placed a small bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Harold Patterson, who planted seeds of love that keep on blooming." Michael, her son, turned out to have inherited Harold's gift for growing things. He began coming by on weekends to help me prune and mulch, and he brought his kids to learn the names of plants. Lisa, artistic like her mother, sketched a beautiful portrait of Harold from the old photographs we had gathered. His eyes kind, his shoulders a little stooped, that gentle half-smile I knew by heart. One afternoon, as we watered the new beds, Sarah shaded her eyes and looked over the yard. "It's strange," she said. "I feel like I knew him a little before today. And yet, standing here, it's like I'm meeting him for the first time." "Gardens do that," I said. "They make you feel like you're stepping into a memory that's still growing." She smiled. "Maybe that's what this is then, a growing memory." On my 70th birthday, 2 years after that first letter, I sat at the same kitchen table, surrounded by a family I hadn't known I had. Sarah was frosting my favorite cake, lemon with meringue. Michael was helping the kids draw flowers on napkins with colored pencils, and Lisa was arranging the candles, counting softly under her breath. "You know," Margaret said, settling into her usual chair, as if it had been waiting for her all along, "Harold would be so proud to see what you've all grown into together." I looked around the room, the very same kitchen where I had once stood trembling, letter in hand, wondering whether my whole life had been a lie. Now it was filled with the noise of living, laughter, footsteps, the scrape of plates, the faint hiss of the kettle on the stove. I thought of Harold, his secrets and his sorrow, his silence about Hyejin and Sarah. For a long time, I'd been angry. For a long time, I'd felt like the truth had arrived too late. But then I looked at the faces around me. Sometimes people keep secrets not out of malice, but out of pain. Harold had carried the guilt of leaving Hyejin and Sarah behind, even though he hadn't known. Maybe he believed that telling me would only drag that old hurt into our life together. He was wrong about that, of course. If he had told me, maybe we could have found Sarah years earlier. Maybe he could have held his grandchildren. Maybe the garden would have had their laughter in it sooner. But we can't change the past. We can only live in the present it gave us. Grandma Dorothy, Grace said, climbing carefully onto my chair. Can I make a wish with you when you blow out the candles? Of course, sweetheart, I said, resting my hand over her tiny one. What should we wish for? Let's wish for Grandpa Harold to know we're all here together now, so he doesn't have to worry anymore. My heart swelled so full, it almost hurt. I think that's the most beautiful wish anyone's ever given me. When it was time, everyone gathered close. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when they're about to hold a sacred little moment. I closed my eyes and made Grace's wish mine. I wished for Harold to know that his daughter was safe and loved, that she had found her American family, and that the love he planted in us, however imperfectly, was still growing. Then I blew out the candles, and the room burst back into ghee. Life, cheers, clapping, someone laughing too loud, the warm chaos of belonging. When I opened my eyes, Sarah was smiling at me with tears in hers. Margaret squeezed Michael's hand like he was her own. Lisa lifted her phone and snapped a photo, catching a small universe of joy right there at my kitchen table. Later, as we washed dishes together, Sarah paused, her hands in soapy water. Sometimes I think maybe everything happened exactly the way it needed to, she said. If my mother had reached him back then, maybe you and he never would have married. Maybe I never would have come to America. Maybe Michael and Lisa wouldn't exist. I dried a plate and thought about that for a long moment. You might be right, I said finally. Maybe some secrets aren't kept out of cowardice. Maybe life just arranges itself. And then one day we wake up and realize we've been walking toward each other all along. She smiled softly. Or maybe Harold always knew we would find each other somehow. Maybe he didn't know how to say it out loud, but he trusted the world to bring us together when the time was right. That night, I sat on the porch the way I had most nights since Harold died. But I didn't feel alone. I could hear Lisa and Sarah talking in the guest room, Michael reading a bedtime story down the hall. From the garden, a faint sweetness drifted. In, the roses and azaleas breathing the same evening air. 2 continents in 1 yard. 2 histories in 1 home. And 1 love that had managed, against the odds, to take root everywhere. My 70th birthday ended the way good days should end, slow and gentle. After the cake and photos and too many hugs to count, the house settled into a soft quiet, the kind that hums with sleep and safety. I stood at the sink, rinsing plates. While Sarah dried them, both of us working in the comfortable rhythm that only family seems to find without trying. Sometimes, she said, stacking a clean plate on the towel, I wonder what my life would have been like if he had known about me. I set the dish sponge down. I wonder too, I said. Maybe he would have gone to find you. Maybe I would have met you long ago. Maybe we would have all stood in this kitchen together, Harold telling bad jokes, you rolling your eyes at him, me pretending not to laugh. She smiled at that. I could see Harold's humor sitting there at the corner of her mouth. He really told bad jokes? The worst, I said, laughing. And he never knew when to stop. He didn't care if no one laughed. He laughed enough. For everyone. We finished the dishes and turned off the kitchen light. In the hallway, she stopped and looked at the framed photograph of our wedding day. Harold's hair was thick and wavy then, his smile young and open. He looks hopeful, she said. He was, I answered. So was I. We were too young to imagine the weight that time can put on a life. The next morning, sunlight poured through the living room like warm water. Michael put a record on, one of Harold's old jazz albums, and the house filled with a soft trumpet line that drifted straight out into the garden. The kids chased each other in the grass, while Sarah and I walked the path along the rose beds and down to the new memorial. We paused at the little bronze plaque. I knelt to brush away a few dry petals that the wind had laid there in the night. "He would have liked this," I said. "He would have loved it," Sarah replied. "He would have asked 1,000 questions about the soil and the shade and if the azaleas are getting enough water. And then he would have tried to move everything around," I added, and we both laughed. Michael came down the path with a trowel in his back pocket and dirt under his nails. "Those forsythia are taking off," he said, proud as a boy with a kite. "You were right about the pruning, Dorothy." "Your great-grandfather taught me that," I said without thinking, and then I corrected myself. "Well, your grandfather. He would have loved a grandkid who talks plants instead of sports." "He got both," Michael grinned, glancing toward the lawn where Tommy was trying to teach Grace how to throw a baseball without letting go too late. "Just on a different timeline." The words settled over us like a blessing. On a different timeline. That afternoon, Sarah and I sat with a shoebox open between us, the same one I had found in the back of the closet. Only now, it didn't feel like a box full of secrets. It felt like a bridge. We read Hyejin's letters out loud, our voices catching at places, steadying at others. Sometimes we stopped to sip tea. Sometimes we just sat quietly and let the words breathe. At one point, Sarah traced her mother's name with a fingertip. "I wish you could have known her," she said. "I feel like I do," I answered softly. "I can hear her voice in these letters. I can see her in the way you stand, in the way you listen before you speak." She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. "For the first time," she said, "it feels like all my pieces are in the same room." That evening, as the heat finally loosened its grip and the garden slipped into blue shade, we lit a few candles along the porch rail. The flame light flickered in the window glass and turned our reflections into something tender and unfinished. "Do you think he knows?" Sarah asked. "About us being here?" "I do," I said, without hesitation. "I think love is the one thing that doesn't stay buried. It finds a way through. It grows back." We sat there until the candles burned low and the stars stitched themselves across the sky. Somewhere beyond the fence, a late train passed, slow and steady, a reminder that even in the dark, everything is still moving forward. It took time, the way all good things do. Not every day was soft. Some afternoons, grief rolled in like a stray storm and sat with us for a while. On those days, Sarah would make tea and I would cut lemon cake, and we'd let the silence be a kind of prayer. Other days, laughter came. Fast and easy, Grace mispronouncing forsythia, Tommy asking if plants could miss people, Michael arguing tenderly with the hose, and Lisa capturing it all in quick, bright sketches. Life, in other words, ordinary and miraculous. One Sunday, Sarah arrived with a slim wooden box. "For the garden," she said. Inside was a small wind chime, 5 brushed metal tubes, and a round cedar sail carved with a single word in Hangul. "What does it say?" I asked, touching the letters. "Yojun, to keep honoring, to continue cherishing," she said. "Mom used to say it about love, not the feeling, but the practice." We hung it from the eave near the rose arch. When the afternoon breeze lifted, the notes were low and kind, the sort of sound that makes you breathe a little deeper without realizing it. After that, even on the days when the air was still, I liked to think I could hear it faintly. Perhaps memory has its own weather. Spring ripened into summer. The azaleas threw out new growth, stubborn and bright. The forsythia would have its glory next year, Michael promised, all sunshine branches in late winter. We planned the way gardeners do, names on paper, dates in pencil, a hopeful map written months ahead of the bloom. It felt like making appointments with joy. One evening, as the sky turned the color of old peaches, Sarah stood beside the plaque and slipped her arm through mine. "I used to think love ended," she said, "that when people died or left or didn't find you when they should have, that was it. The line just stopped. And now? I asked. She looked out over the yard. Fireflies stitched slow green dashes above the lawn. Now I think love is more like a root, she said. Sometimes it grows underground for a very long time. You don't see it, but it's moving, reaching. And then one day, there it is. Something green, right where you needed it. I leaned my head to her shoulder. Then we'll keep watering, I said. We did. We watered and pruned and staked what needed support. We called when we didn't have much to say and visited when we did. Sarah sent me photos of her classroom, hand-painted posters, clay pinch pots, smudges of tempera on the floor. I sent her recipes on index cards in Harold's careful block letters, pot roast, cornbread, the lemon cake that never lasted long enough to cool completely. On the anniversary of the day I first opened her letter, we held a small gathering in the garden. Margaret brought deviled eggs. Michael strung cafe lights along the fence. Lisa set out jars of flowers, roses from the old bed and azaleas from the new, red and white standing together like they'd been neighbors all their lives. The kids made paper cranes and tucked them into the low branches, a quiet wish for all. The journeys that still had to be made. When it was time, Sarah cleared her throat, looked around at the faces she loved, and began to read. It was one of Hyejin's letters, chosen for this day. Her voice was steady, warm. My dear Harold, she read. Some days I think I hear your step on the stair. Some days I open the window so the wind can bring me news. I do not know where. You are, only that you are under the same sky as the child who carries your eyes. This is my prayer, that you are safe, that love finds you, and that what we planted is not lost. The chime moved, a small sound in the hush. I felt Harold everywhere and nowhere at once, in the rose scent, in the laughter waiting at the edges, of our stillness, in the way Sarah's hand trembled just once and then grew calm. What we planted is not lost, I thought. No, not lost at all. Later, after the dishes were done and the lights were glowing like nearby stars, Grace crawled into my lap with the solemnity only a 5-year-old can muster. Grandma Dorothy, she said, is the garden finished? Smiled. Gardens are never finished, I told her. They just keep going. Like love? She asked. Exactly like love. That night, when the house had settled into its gentle breathing and the yard had gone dark, I sat for a moment with the shoebox. No longer a reliquary of secrets, but a family album in disguise. I returned each letter carefully, then closed. The lid. On top, I placed a recent photo Lisa had taken. Sarah and me, side by side in the doorway, the garden open behind us like a held note. I'm grateful, I whispered, to the quiet, to the wind, to anyone listening. For the truth that took the long way home, for the daughter I found when I thought all the doors had closed, for the man I loved who was imperfect and kind and who planted more than he knew. In the end, this is what I learned. Love is not undone by what it doesn't know. It is patient. It waits beneath the surface. It finds a crack, a beam of light, a softened corner of earth. And then, when the time is right, it rises. My name is Dorothy Patterson. I am 68 years old. I live in a house on Oleander Avenue where roses and azaleas grow side by side. Once, I believed the best days were behind me. Now, I know better. The best days are the ones that keep arriving, one bright morning at a time, and if the wind chime sings when there isn't any wind, well, some things don't need explaining. Some things just mean hello.